The wind howled like a living thing the night they abandoned her, tearing across the open white plains with a cruelty that seemed deliberate, as if the storm itself had chosen her as its victim. Snow swallowed the road behind the carriage wheels, erasing proof that anyone had ever traveled there at all. She knelt in the drifts, barefoot, her dress soaked stiff with ice, fingers trembling so violently she could barely close the battered suitcase in front of her. Every breath burned, every heartbeat felt like it might be her last. She didn't cry out anymore. She had learned that begging only made them crueler. Just minutes earlier, she had been a wife in name, a burden in truth, dragged across the frontier under the promise of a new life that never existed. The woman in the carriage had pointed at her with gloved fury, shouting words sharper than the cold, calling her useless, disgraceful, an expense no one would carry any longer. And the man who had sworn vows to her had said nothing at all. He had simply turned away. As the carriage lurched forward and disappeared into the blizzard, the silence left behind was heavier than the snow piling on her shoulders. She collapsed to her knees, clutching the open suitcase as clothes spilled into the snow like discarded memories of a life she never truly had. The cold crept into her bones, numbing her feet first, then her hands, then her hope. She thought of her mother's voice, long gone, once warning her that the world was not kind to women who trusted too easily. She wondered if this was how people vanished, quietly, namelessly swallowed by white emptiness. And then she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, not rushed by panic or cruelty. A silhouette emerged through the storm, a tall man in a long coat, hat pulled low, snow clinging to his beard. He stopped several paces away, eyes fixed on her as if weighing something far heavier than the storm. She tried to stand and failed, her legs refusing to answer. The man took another step closer, boots crunching against ice. He looked past her at the abandoned suitcase, at the carriage tracks fading into nothing, at the red, cracked skin of her feet pressed into snow. Something hardened in his expression, not anger but resolve. "They left you," he said quietly, more statement than question. She nodded once, unable to speak. The wind screamed around them. He removed his gloves, offered his hand, and his voice cut through the storm with a certainty that felt like a command carved into stone. "You'll come with me now." If you're still listening at this moment, if this story has already pulled you into its cold, unforgiving world, take a second to subscribe, because what happens next will change everything. He wrapped her feet in his own coat before, lifting her without hesitation, her body shockingly light in his arms, as though the storm had already begun to claim her. She drifted in and out of awareness as he carried her through the whiteout, each step taken against the screaming wind an act of defiance. When she woke again, firelight flickered against rough wooden walls, and the smell of smoke and coffee filled the air. She lay on a narrow bed, wrapped in blankets, her frozen skin burning as warmth returned in painful waves. The man sat nearby, cleaning snow from his boots, his movements quiet and controlled. He didn't ask her name. He didn't demand explanations. He simply handed her a cup when she could sit and said, "Drink slow." Over the following days, she learned he was known simply as the Cowboy, not because he tended cattle, but because he lived by a code most men had abandoned. He asked nothing in return for shelter, food, or kindness. When nightmares shook her awake, he pretended not to notice. When her feet bled as they healed, he brought fresh bandages without comment. Slowly, the truth came out, not as a confession but as a release. She spoke of being married for convenience, of being traded like cargo, of being blamed for miscarriages caused by beatings, of being dragged west to be discarded when she no longer served a purpose. The Cowboy listened, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the fire, his silence heavier than words. One night, weeks later, riders came. The same carriage family had discovered she survived, and survival was an inconvenience they could not allow. They demanded she be returned, calling her property, calling her a liar, calling her ungrateful. The Cowboy stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, body unmoving. "She ain't going anywhere," he said. Threats followed. Guns were raised. Snow fell again, softer this time, almost peaceful. The standoff ended without blood, but not without consequence. Word spread. The frontier noticed. And for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her without condition. If this chapter moved you, if you felt the weight of survival and quiet courage, subscribe now, because the final chapter delivers justice, transformation, and a choice that will leave you breathless. Spring came slowly. melting the cruelty of winter into rushing streams and soft green hills, and with it came a new life neither of them had planned. She learned to stand tall again, to work land, to laugh quietly at first, then freely. The cowboy never claimed her, never spoke of ownership or debt. When danger returned, it was not as a storm but as law, papers, claims, men with badges demanding she return to a marriage declared legal on paper. This time she did not kneel. She stood beside the cowboy, her voice steady as she spoke her truth before a town that had never expected a woman like her to survive, let alone speak. Witnesses came forward, bruises remembered, lies unraveled. The marriage was dissolved, the past stripped of its power, and when it was over, when silence filled the room again, she realized something had changed forever. She was no longer the woman abandoned in a blizzard. She was the woman who walked out of one. The cowboy asked her then, not as a rescuer, not as a savior, but as an equal, "What do you want now?" She looked toward the horizon, toward a future not defined by survival but by choice, and in that moment the storm finally ended. If this story stayed with you, if you believe in second chances and quiet strength, don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard, remembered, and shared.